and we'll start the analysis right here of Baez as we go through. And so, Jim, I'm starting up with the side view, not the front view. But as we go into his load here, okay, the good part about his load is you can see as he's starting to lift his front foot, you're going to see the knob of the bat or his hand start to kind of load down and back just a little bit, okay? They're going to kind of go together. And then he has this big move as his foot's coming down and forward of lifting his back shoulder and back elbow up. So he's super inverted with his front shoulder, okay? And as he's doing that, the knob of the bat is actually, most people say, oh, face the catcher. He's actually like above the catcher. That's how much his bat is wrapped, right? Now his front foot is technically not on the ground yet. Okay, so I have his front foot a couple inches from the ground, and that bat is super wrapped. I mean, that barrel is, way over his head, where typically at launch, you kind of want the middle of the barrel is going to be right over the middle of the head. You can see he's a long way from that. So once his front heel lands, he gets to toe touch, he gets the heel plant. You can see it's in a much more normal position. So I'm going to bring him before his front foot lands, and I'm going to draw a line. And then I'm going to bring it to when his front heel lands, and you can see it gets, a few degree difference there into a more normal position where now the knob is actually, probably facing the catcher's mask. That's a pretty extreme move. Like, it's an extreme move even where he is at heel plant. It's a good move. His front shoulder is down, right? What I typically tell players, especially if we're working bat drag, is, we're trying to keep that right armpit open when the front foot lands. Okay, really important there. 98% of youth players, when their front foot lands, their hands have already started to drop and their elbow has already started to drop towards their ribs. You can see he keeps a lot of space in there between his elbow and his rib cage, his back elbow and his rib cage. And that's what creates separation. That's what keeps his front shoulder down. That's what keeps his chest back. And then you can see his hips are open. So when you have that much stretch, you have to create it somehow. And if you take that video back, you can see how much movement he has in his shoulders with the stride. Okay, so as his stride's coming down, he's really working his back elbow super high. It's above his head, You'll see this position on the graphic on the YouTube video. But his elbow is actually above his head. If I did that, I'd probably tear my shoulder in half. Okay, you got to be pretty limber to get that. And then it comes down in position. So again, the more moving parts you have, the more that can go wrong throughout the swing. So say Javi gets into a slump somewhere throughout the season, things that I would look for would be like, okay, well, how long is that process taking? How many hundredths of a second does it take him to start his load and to plant his front heel? Okay, that would be the first thing that I look at. Okay, is that timing consistent? Is it still the same? Is it faster now? Is it slower now? One of the other things is when his front heel does plant and he's in his launch position, where's the ball in relationship to home plate? Is the ball 30 feet from home plate, 20 feet from home? Well, it's not going to be 30, but, is it 12 feet? Is it 14 feet? Is it 9 feet? Is that causing him to have issues? So the more consistent we can be with our load, meaning it always takes 0.80 seconds from start to finish. If it's always the same, or within 1/100th of a second, it's consistent. And then the ball, is always, when that player's at their best, it's always at that 10-foot mark or 11-foot mark. It makes it easier. But the more moving parts you have, it's like juggling multiple objects. So if I gave you 2 balls to juggle with 2 hands, that would be pretty easy. We have a little bit of a hand load and we have our front foot going. If all of a sudden I give you 3 balls to juggle because you have a higher leg kick, well, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to juggle those 3 balls. And now all of a sudden, if we have a high leg kick and a big hand hitch, all of a sudden now it's 4 balls you're going to have to try to control, and it's going to make it more difficult. So, that's where some people can do it and some people can't. I'm not saying that he can't, because he totally can do this, and that's comfortable for him. But that will make your timing more difficult to stay consistent. And then as we continue, what questions do you have? And then we'll go on to the swing. I know we've just talked about timing so far. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, he's big, and this is a great swing, by the way. This is a great swing with perfect timing. If we bring this video actually back to where you could see it from the front, this ball is. I mean, he's not very close to the plate at all, and this ball is inner quarter of the plate. Okay, and he hits it to center field. So he definitely let this ball travel a lot more than he normally does on a pitch that would be in. Now, the catcher was not set up in. Okay, so this was obviously a mistake pitch. But as he comes through here, we know his heel plant position's good. We know his launch position's good. He's creating separation. He has no bat drag. And then the big thing is the knob and the back elbow moving at the same rate as he gets to his short approach. So again, when he gets to his short approach, when his chest is facing his front foot, the knob of the bat is in front of the armpit. The knob of the bat is, his elbow is not in the slot yet. Okay, that's good. His hands are getting in front of his armpit. Then his elbow finally hits his rib cage once his hands get kind of out in front of his belt line, kind of towards his front thigh. Now, in this position, when we'll call this the approach position, when the bat is equidistant to the camera, okay, so his barrel and knob are in line with the batter's box line, the barrel is below his hands, okay, and the more the barrel is below the hands there, typically the lower average we're going to have as a player. So players that hit for a really high average, the knob's going to be more out in front of where it is here. It'll be out in front of this elbow. And then because the knob's out in front more, that barrel's going to stay up longer. Okay, so those are your guys like, that hit 300 and above. They're typically going to be in that position. The barrel's not going to drop as much. Okay, and that's why they try to get him up, right? Sometimes because of that slight barrel drop. And you can see he has a pretty good vertical bat angle here. It's pretty steep. So if this pitch is coming in towards the catcher, he might create some side spin on some pitches if he was really late. But honestly, for this pitch here, he was, on plane for a pretty darn good amount of time. Okay, he was on plane, obviously right at his front toes, probably out in front another few inches. So I would say he's on plane. I'm going to try to draw some brackets here from there and probably mid back thigh. The only issue with hitting it too deep would be that vertical bat angle where he'd slice it to right field. But you can see his barrel's not dumping or anything like that on this pitch. His legs are great. I mean, he really has good lower half. That front knee, great leverage. You can see his backside comes through. His back foot comes up and off the ground here, and that's fine. But his front leg pushes back. You can see his front toes lift a little bit. That's usually a good sign that he's pushing through his heel and his hamstring and his glute on the left side. And then his extension position is good. You can see even after contact. So if we go to contact and go 1, 2, 3 frames after contact, his right wrist and his right arm is still under his left arm. Okay, it's one of the big things that I see with amateur players is, in fact, all of my online members better be watching this because I address this all the time with them, is that right wrist is usually rolled over the left wrist in this position, and that's something that big leaguers don't do. They really don't. They're able to extend through without manipulating with their wrist too much, which will cause a lot of impact issues, and consistency issues. So really good swing. He's got a big follow through and hits himself in the lower back. Again, this dude is super athletic and super flexible. But the best part about Baez is if you look at his follow through, you're like, good Lord, like that's a big move. You look at his stride and you're like, man, that's a big move. You look at his wrapping of the bat before his front foot lands, that's a big move. But if you just stopped him from heel plant to power V, he looks like pretty much every really good Hall of Famer, major league hitter that's ever played the game. And that's what's cool about baseball. I mean, that's what my dad talked about years ago is, mechanics happen after the front foot lands. through contact. And no matter if you're Paul Molitor and you didn't stride at all, or you're Javier Baez and you have a big leg kick, most guys from heel plant to power V are pretty much identical. And that's what we do. Like that's, whether you're at the lab or you're with me online or you're with me one-on-one, that's what I'm going to drill in is, making sure your mechanics are locked in first before we start to address rhythm and timing and approach.